Okay, so I'm just recording this video to walk through the template repository that I set up to show how I work with DBT core, specifically with Google BigQuery, because that's convenient for me to work with. And there is a free sandbox that you can use to play around with it, where you can process up to 1 terabyte a month and store up to 10 gigabytes of data without putting a credit card in. I think that's a really worthwhile safety net when you're playing with this sort of stuff. So that's why I'm using BigQuery. I wanted to capture how I set DBT core up to work with CI/CD systems and to work well as a local development environment. Because I've explained this to several people over the past few months, and it's the result and constant evolution of where I've got to with DBT over the past 3 years or so. So I wanted to capture that so that I don't keep just evolving my version of this and not really sharing it very effectively with anybody else inside Equal Experts or outside Equal Experts. So I welcome any feedback on what works, whether this works for you, what works, what doesn't work. If you have any suggestions, any recommendations, there's a contributors guide in the GitHub repository that contains the work, and you're more than welcome to kind of raise an issue, get in touch with me to make improvements as well. I expect to improve this as we find better ways of doing things. Shout out to all the teammates I've worked with over the past 2 or 3 years who have helped me to come to this understanding of what a good way of working with. Okay, so here is the template repository as it stands today. You can find it at browser/dbt_BigQuery_template. I'll put a link in the video description. Inside it, this is a GitHub template, so there's one way you can use this. It's very convenient. If you're on GitHub, is just click use this template. Let's make this a little bit bigger. There we go. Use this template, big green button, create a new repository. I have played around with it in a code space. It does work in a code space, but I'm going to be connecting to my BigQuery data warehouse, so I don't want to be messing around with credentials in that code space. So I'm going to create a new repository with this. I don't need to include any other branches. I'm going to put it in my own personal repository. I'm going to call it DBT Template Demo. Not public, obviously set these things as you see fit. Create repository, give it a few moments. And a few minutes later, we have DBT Template Demo, which is generated from that template. So there. So rather than look at it in GitHub, I'm going to switch over now, and we're going to clone this repo out to my machine, and I'm going to work with it locally, which is how I would work with the technology. Okay. It's just a terminal window. I'll clone that template I just created, or that repo I just created from the template out to here, and then I'm going to go straight into VS Code. So this is a very opinionated template. I work with VS Code with DBT Core. This template is set up, as you see, in such a way to work well with VS Code. It can, exactly the same things can be done in other IDEs and other environments, but I set it up for the way that I work with VS Code. DBT Template Demo. And switching to VS Code. Okay, now switching straight to VS Code by sharing this window instead. In the time it took me to do that, VS Code is already, as you can see in the terminal here, VS Code has started setting up the environment for me. Now, the way it's doing that, there's a tasks.json file here. Basically, that's calling it running a script, and that script is taking care of the kind of the stuff that everybody needs to do to anybody I was working with this repository would need to do to set up and stay up to date. You can see the details it's coming from. This is just running the script and it's an update. And that script, which is here, is checking whether I'm running in a virtual environment, setting a bit of a guard first to, if something does go wrong, this environment variable should make sure this script cannot install stuff into the system Python installation. It has to be running in a virtual environment. So I should keep us safe if anything does go wrong. Go through it to checking whether I'm running in a virtual environment. If I'm not, I create one. This command will be fine if there is a virtual environment. It will just be a no-op, and then I activate the virtual environment, assuming that I'm running in a kind of a shell script friendly environment. If you're on Windows, you'll need to modify that. Then I go through and install the system packages. So pip and setup tools are the two system packages that commonly crop up as causing problems or having vulnerabilities. So I make sure they are upgraded to the latest version. I install safety, which is a free vulnerability checking solution for Python. It is not free for non-commercial use, so check out what it says about that. Figure out how you want it, however you want to do vulnerabilities. And by default, we have something in there that can check whether anything we just installed is vulnerable. So then I still upgrade the project-specific dependencies, which in this case are just DBT BigQuery greater than or equal to 170. So that's an open constraint. That means this script, when it runs, can just continue updating. Every time it runs, it will update DBT BigQuery to whatever the latest version that's available is. So quite often I find that you can wind up needing other Python level dependencies in these projects. An example, I was recently working with a team who used Python pre-commit, so they need to install that, and this was convenient, pop it in here. Again, that's kept up to date automatically and available in virtual environments. So having these in requirements, pretty helpful. I found Poetry, pip, and these technologies, they just don't really add any value. This works perfectly well enough for this kind of a use with DBT. You're not spending much time messing around with Python itself. You're not creating Python packages, that kind of thing. So keeping it really simple, just using pip requirements.txt, letting dependencies update automatically whenever they're used to try and stay ahead of any vulnerabilities. But with that additional, with that scan still in place to tell us if we are running something that is vulnerable, maybe there isn't a fixed version out yet, make us aware of that. So DBT itself has a packaging system. We've got packages for DBT in packages.yml. I'm just bringing in DBT utils for this. I'll show you why in a moment. And again, I've got an open constraint here. Anything greater than a version 1.1.1. So over the years, I put a lot of thought into how to deal with keeping up to date, how to deal with vulnerabilities, things like that. The way of working I found works best, and I feel like it minimizes the risk, is to try and stay up to date with all the packages that are part of your software projects, as well as all the packages on your computer and phone, etc. I don't see there's any real difference here, and I've not found any significant issues of stability keeping things up to date. If you do get an issue with a new release being problematic for you, something is going to break, which is going to inform you of the issue, and you can then pin that dependency back until that issue is resolved. Certainly seen that with some problematic versions of DBT Athena over the past year or so. So you can, if you do find issues with a newer version of DBT BigQuery, for example, you could pin this dependency until you find a way to resolve whatever the problem is. So as you can see here, we went through, installed all this stuff, and then ran the safety check, which as of right now is not finding any security vulnerabilities. Again, lots of text printed out here about the non-commercial nature and about the limitations of safety in this non-commercial version, which you'll need to read that, decide how you want to proceed. You've probably got your own solution for checking vulnerabilities anyway. And the last thing it tries to do is load the user environment, which is not, I haven't got the user environment set up yet, so we'll do that now. All this is covered in the README. We've managed to automate all the kind of local software setup, and so we're now connecting to the data warehouse. So what I need to do is update the .env file with the appropriate values. So there is a template here. I'm going to copy and paste. And update that. Create a sandbox data set in this project for myself. The US region works with the data set that I'm using as a source. I'll show you that in a moment. DBT project in my case is SQL videos. So I save that. Okay. So I've got my .env file. So actually, let me just rename that away and show you what would have happened without it. So this terminal is now finished. I need a new bash. So I tend to work with the terminal. having switched between so many IDs and stuff in the past, the terminal always works the same way everywhere. So I tend to stick with that. So first thing I'm going to try and do, let's see if we are set up DBT. Can I see DBT? No. So let's activate the VM here. There we go. Now I'm in the VM. Can I see DBT now? Yes. Right. So DBT debug. Let's see if we. This will fail, as it should. There we go. So this way, if you forget to set your environment, you'll see this DBT environment required but not provided DBT dataset. So just to explain what's going on here, so you've probably seen DBT profiles, you'll see DBT profiles mentioned in documentation. What I've done for this project is basically set up the DBT profile as I need for BigQuery, and then just set up environment variables for the bits that actually change from project to project. So the way I used to set profiles up, I have a profiles.yaml in my home directory. As you work on more and more projects, that just grows and grows. It's not very practical. So, and most of those kind of YAML standards you can see here, there's actually a very small amount of this text that actually changes. The rest of it needs to be the same. You end up with something that looks like there's my dev environment, there's my prod environment, there's my staging environment. This is, whilst it works, it's not the easiest thing to manage. And I end up, before I came across this solution, I ended up with lots of documentation explaining how to set up your profiles. Whereas this, you don't need to worry about it. You don't need to look at your profiles. I've templated out what you need for BigQuery. If you have someone using Snowflake or Athena, you basically adjust the profile to fit that data warehouse, adjust the requirements to use the right adapter. Probably is, and then any dialectic changes that you need to make in the SQL that's actually in your DBT project should be the extent of changes that you need to make. Might give that a go. Might try and adapt this to Snowflake and just prove that at some point. Well, you give it a go. Let me know how it goes. Right. Okay. So that didn't work. That's quite nice that we get a nice sort of like clear error, not just like an empty string or something. So let's just get rid of that underscore on the end and try again. So still not going to work because I'm not actually loaded the environment. So dot.env, that loads the environment. Source.env will do the same thing. Now we should be able to connect. There we go. So looking pretty good at this point. Okay, so we can see, so DBT debug has printed out where it's getting its config from, etc., where the files are, the fact that they're valid, Git is present, and I've been able to connect to the database with BigQuery, the BigQuery adapter. Okay, so everything is lined up. Okay, one thing I've already done this morning is view cloud of application default login, which you'll need to do if you don't have a local credential for your data warehouse, if it's BigQuery. That is documented, I think. Yeah, that is documented as part of this connect data warehouse. So if you go through the README step by step, it should cover everything you need. Okay, BigQuery, I've got my SQL videos project selected. I'm using my own personal account. And you can see here it says Sandbox. One thing I can say is that all the work that has been involved in setting up this template, this demo, was all worked within the sandbox without hitting any limits. So it should be fine if you want to actually play with this without putting a credit card into Google. Okay, so SQL videos, you can see there's no data sets in there at the moment. So let me flick back. Okay, so back in front of DBT, let's do a DBT build. So a DBT build, I think it's a fairly new command, last couple of versions of DBT. It does a run and a test if you've used DBT in the past. So that's happening at the moment. I'm going to walk you through the details. So we've got two on-start hooks that are running. You'll find these in dbtproject.yaml. One, I usually add a macro if I can to try to create the data set or schema that I would want to be working in. So that can help me when I'm working in like my own personal sandbox, if I have permission to create that scheme if it doesn't exist, it helps me keep my sandboxes within each project that I'm working in, not one mega sandbox in the middle of everything, which I've then got to look after. So I tend to do it that way. That's what this is doing. And this is just a macro that's in here to make sure that happens, set some description information, location, labels, etc. So the second on-run start is ensuring EDS. So I wrote a post a little while ago, which is one of the most popular posts on ecoexperts.com's blog for the past year, about how to, the approach that I use to set up DBT UDFs and test UDFs and deploy and operate them with DBT. So I've just got an example UDF in here that's very noddy example. It's just basically uppercases a string and puts an exclamation mark on the end. But this can be arbitrarily complex SQL. It can be more than one function, or you can have a separate function in multiple of these files. In the most recent ones I've done, I just have one ensure EDS and then numerous functions listed out in there that all get set up as part of on-run start. One thing worth pointing out, these things don't get tidied up. My DBT is not aware of them. They're not part of the dependency graph, so DBT can't clean them up afterwards. They're not a particularly good solution for that, other than don't delete these things to get rid of them. Swap that for drop or drop function if exist, or whatever the equivalent syntax is, which then make sure things tidy up after themselves. So if you want to get rid of this, the simplest way to do is to drop function if it exists. And then once that has gone and rolled out to your production deployment, you can remove that altogether. Bit of a pain, but it's the best solution I've got at the moment. Okay, so that's UDS. So this all has happened before we start trying to do any actual work. Then I've got a source, which is here. It's part of the BigQuery public data set, the BBC News data set. And I've just kind of added some tests in there to confirm some hypotheses that I had about the data in those columns. Turns out that the body text is actually not unique. So I always find when I have DBT tests, I learn something about the data, but there you go. So yeah, you can see those running there and passing, and there's not much data in this data set, so they're very cheap to run. Then I deploy a view categories over the top, which is basically just giving me a group by category and count, which I then run some more tests over to ensure that my assumptions about that data are all hold. You see DBT utils being used here just to check that the count is at least 0. And that's it. Other things to note, so I've got some macros can be documented. Certainly come across, certainly something that I learned very recently, so where you can document your UDF functions. And I think that stuff comes out in BigQuery. It does depend on your adapter though. I'll check that in a moment. You can also have an overview. If you generate DBT documentation, then the overview will be what shows on the front page of there, instead of the standard DBT stuff that's actually useless for anybody trying to use documentation. Okay, so I think that's pretty much everything. Back into BigQuery. Let me make this a little bit bigger. And then go rid of that. There we go. Okay, so this is a window as it was earlier in the video. So quick tip: if you want to refresh this view, then you can click Show Start Only and back, and there you go. Go refresh the contents of that tree. Okay, so we got this. So the UDFs appear under routines, and you'll see the description that we talked about being populated there. Plus the arguments, you see what the query is doing there as well. Categories, you can see again the details. So we've got labels being applied here and the description. The categories view that I created. We want to query that. This is 20.55 kilobytes. So that's a very small query. There we go. The categories and the article counts coming out of there. Just the video. Realized I'd forgotten to actually show what happens when you come back, say the next day or later on. So I just started a new instance of VS Code, totally separate to the one we were looking at a moment ago in your timeline. All I'm going to do is just open this project, and you'll see the automation that kicks in to keep things up to date and whatnot. So let me just open this thing up. And what happens? Here we go. So it goes back into the init and update script. We see this time lots and lots of requirements already satisfied. Nothing actually being installed at the installs have like green bars going across. So there's nothing else that's running. There's nothing that's been updated since I did this original installation earlier on today. But basically what happens when you open up this project, this project in DBT, the first time it does what it can to it, so the virtual env and install software. When that's all been done and you set up your .env file and you have credentials that can connect through to your data warehouse, then that kind of on starts initialization, goes through, updates all the software, gives you a DBT debug to make sure that your connectivity is there. Obviously, you've got into the issue, and know about that as soon as you start, probably easy enough finding out after an hour's work. And it also double checks whether there are any security vulnerabilities against the software we've got installed right now at the point at which you restarted your IDE. So that's how the local environment stays up to date. I will talk about the build environment, the CI side environment in another video. To get moving with this, you create a new repository based on that template. If you're on GitHub, if you're on something like GitLab, again, you can clone that, delete the Git directory, and then use it as a template in exactly the same way. So if you are operating a different ecosystem, you can use it. Create a new repository from the template. It should automatically create you a virtual env and set up the software that you need, the DBT packages that you need, make sure they're up to date and run a vulnerability scan. Make sure you've got a credential on your machine that you can use to connect to your data warehouse, and you set up your .env file based on the .env _template to connect to the correct data warehouse data set, etc. Which these sections will vary a little bit by your data warehouse. The setup is for BigQuery, so it's a BigQuery at the moment. If you're using Snowflake, it should be fairly straightforward to see how that translates to Snowflake. Run DBT debug. If that connects, you should be good to go. So you can delete the sources functions, root the functions by dropping it if you've already deployed it, and start building your own DBT project. I should say getting this thing set up has taken me several days. There is a bunch of GitHub workflow stuff in there to kind of provide an example of how to get your DBT project running in automation in your CI/CD system as well. We'll cover that in a subsequent video. That is all in just under GitHub, the GitHub directory, standard GitHub Actions workflow. So if you are keen to get that side of things working, if you're on GitHub, then that should give you a good starting point. It's a very basic workflow. It just deploys off the main branch. It doesn't have any constraints in there to stop merge requests and branches from deploying the same way. So it's a very, very basic workflow. There's more work to do there, but it gets up and running, shows how to actually connect using workflow identity as well through to GCP. So it's a starting point. Again, any improvements or suggestions welcomed in that area as well.